Hi friends, if you don't want to get cancer, then you should really consider fighting with folate to make up for lost time. But it's not as simple as just taking a supplement or eating folic acid enriched foods like pasta, bread, rice, and sugary cereals. The source of your folate is just as important because I'm sure you know that our food is filled with artificial chemicals, dioxins, and forever plastics, and natural toxins like arsenic and cadmium. Your grandparents lived till 90 because they didn't get our special fillers, filling our bellies with processed foods or collecting in organ meats. Now, in addition to toxins, our nation is overfed and undernourished because our foods lack essential micronutrients like folate. And you can do what everyone else is doing and stick your head in the sand like an ostrich or fight for your life and focus on food-grade folate, which is very different from eating synthetic folic acid added to your spaghetti, breakfast cereals, white rice, or supplements. Now, on top of that, if you have a methylated gene mutation, then you may not metabolize synthetic folic acid, which leads to a buildup in your system. And yes, that's a problem too, and we will get to that a little later. Now, here's a list of 12 natural foods rich in folate, which is bioavailable, unlike folic acid. Now, how many servings of folate-rich foods are you eating in a day? I buy these lentils in these giant bags because I'm trying to get as much as I can. Chances are you aren't eating enough for your metabolic needs. Folate is an essential B vitamin, B9, and we will talk about how that supports your DNA synthesis, cell division, amino acid metabolism, and methylation. Now, these are all fancy biochemical terms that sum up how your body works, and understanding why is absolutely essential to choosing the best foods and avoiding the worst foods. Otherwise, you will once again be scrolling on the internet, swayed in the wrong direction, watching that next influencer short. And here's an example of the power of eating an adequate amount of folate for your body's needs. A randomized controlled trial in Bangladesh found that 400 micrograms of folic acid daily for 12 weeks reduced blood arsenic levels by 13.6% in those who had arsenic poisoning. Now, I know literally I said avoid the folic acid supplements and get food grade folate. But if you are dealing with a tremendous amount of stress like arsenic poisoning, then there is no way to achieve the doses that you need from food alone. So there is a place for synthetic vitamins when used appropriately, guided by a physician. This isn't medical advice. See your own personal physician to get personalized healthcare. However, not everyone responds to folic acid, and there are now much more bioavailable forms of folate. But you may wonder, how did people even get arsenic poisoning? Well, in the 1970s, UNICEF installed tube wells to bring clean water to millions of people in Bangladesh. The problem was they never tested their water for arsenic. So the water looked clean, and that's because arsenic is invisible. Too many people falsely believe that arsenic only affects third world countries. Well, have you checked where your food is grown? All food actually needs water to grow, right? So every country who fails to regulate pollution will have a ton of arsenic, as well as over 1,000 other pollutants. Our oceans are filled with arsenic, and that's because the world has turned our oceans into a giant toilet bowl. But no worries, there's plenty of arsenic-tainted soil in the US, with the worst offenders being the Midwest, as evident by our homegrown rice arsenic content. So if the president wants us to buy American, then the president needs to convince American companies to stop growing food in polluted soil and water. Fat chance that's going to happen without laws with penalties. Now, obviously, it's important to avoid foods with arsenic as well as other contaminants. But arsenic is kind of ubiquitous. It's not just in rice. It's in baby food, it's in seafood, it's even in juice. And did you know that the highest level of arsenic has actually been found in meat, fish, and poultry? So I know that arsenic is in water, so I can understand why fish would have high arsenic, but why does it gather in meat and poultry? And why was it especially concentrated in chicken? Well, that's because arsenic was a feed additive. Arsenic-based drugs were deliberately used to feed meat, chickens and turkeys for, let's say, I think 72 years. It was used as a growth promoter. It helped reduce parasites and to improve the color of meat. This practice was finally banned by the FDA in 2016. So I grew up eating arsenic-tainted meats. So those animals had over 72 years to poop out that arsenic in the soil. Many countries still use arsenic in their feed, except in Western Europe. Hence, there's no one that doesn't need more than the RDA's recommended amount of folate. Without folate, you literally can't make normal cells because you can't make normal nucleotides or the building blocks of DNA and RNA without adequate folate. Folate is involved in the conversion of uracilate to thymidylate, which is necessary for proper DNA replication. And without enough folate, cells struggle to divide, especially your immune cells. DNA makes genes and RNA translates those genes. High intake of folate-rich foods is associated with lower risk of esophageal cancer. That's a high trauma area trying to mitigate all that gastric acid. Now, the problem with synthetic folic acid, despite some studies showing short-term benefit, is that folic acid has also been associated with an increased risk of cancer. Now, food folate, not synthetic folic acid, is always preferred on a daily basis. So don't get comfortable just because there's fortified vitamins in your breakfast cereal or high protein bar. Now, folate is critical for methylation because it is a key player in the 1-carbon metabolism cycle, which supplies methyl groups for biochemical reaction. Now, methylation is a fundamental biochemical process that occurs in billions of reactions per second across your entire body. And while it is impossible to count every single individual reaction, studies estimate that there are over 200 different enzymatic reactions that rely on methylation, and many of which are directly dependent on folate. And I mentioned that your DNA and RNA requires methylation. Those are responsible for your gene regulation and epigenetics. Number 2, you need to detoxify, as well as your liver needs to function. Number 3, you need homocysteine to become methionine, and that supports your cardiovascular system as well as your ability to detox. Number 4, you need neurotransmitters in your brain as well as mood regulation. Number 5, you need melanin, which supports your nervous system and brain. And number 6, you need to break down histamine, which is an allergen and immune regulation. Number 7, you need energy production for your mitochondrial function and metabolism. And number 8, you need to support your hormone and estrogen metabolism. So DNA methylation helps regulate gene expression by adding methyl groups, cytosine bases. And the process is essential for cell differentiation and development, for silencing harmful genes like tumor suppressor genes or viral DNA, for aging and epigenetic memory, to prevent cancer and autoimmune diseases. And defects in folate-dependent methylation leads to cancer, age-related disorders, and immune dysregulation. And folate isn't just critical for people. Many bacteria rely on folate for growth and replication. And unlike humans, bacteria actually can make their own folate de novo rather than obtain it from their food. Examples include E. coli, Staphylococcus aureus, Streptococcus pneumonia, Listeria monocytogenes, and Mycobacterium tuberculosis. Now, these are just foreign names to your ears, but these are the germs that fill my everyday bread and butter job as an infectious disease physician. Take tuberculosis. 10.8 million people around the world suffer from tuberculosis. And there's literally an outbreak right now of tuberculosis in Kansas City. Tuberculosis alone is a leading cause of mortality from a single infectious disease. And all these people, they need to take tuberculosis drug, which are major causes of drug-induced liver injury during treatment. And this is a big deal because if you don't tolerate your tuberculosis drugs, drug resistance builds up and potentially your tuberculosis can disseminate all over your body and can take your life. But before you go, you're considered a highly infectious contaminated vector. And guess which people tolerate their TB drugs better? Those who increase their fruit and vegetable intake. They tolerate tuberculosis treatment much better. And maybe it's also because people who take tuberculosis drugs often have a folate deficiency. Many of our prescription drugs actually cause people to lose folate. In fact, several antibiotics work by blocking folate synthesis in bacteria. That's how we kill bacteria. And these include sulfa drugs called sulfonamides and trimethoprim. And these drugs work differently. By combining the two of them, you actually get a combination synergistic mechanism of action, blocking folate metabolism in bacteria to cause them to die. You may have heard of sulfamethoxazole and trimethoprim combo, or Bactrim. Sulfamethoxazole is a competitive inhibitor of dihydroproteinate synthase, an enzyme bacteria need to make folate. And this prevents their DNA synthesis, leading to their bacterial demise. Now, trimethoprim, it blocks dihydrofolate reductase, preventing the conversion of dihydrofolate to tetrahydrofolate, which is essential for DNA and amino acid synthesis in bacteria. But we also use tetrahydrofolate. There is a cross reaction, so long-term use can potentially cause folate reduction in people. There are several other drugs that can cause folate deficiency, and this includes methotrexate. We use methotrexate for cancer chemotherapy, for autoimmune conditions such as rheumatoid arthritis and psoriasis. This drug inhibits human dihydrofolate reductase, so it prevents the breakdown of our own cells from metabolizing folate and therefore compromises DNA synthesis. And this affects rapidly replicating cells like cancer cells and immune cells. In turn, this makes people anemic, neutropenic, and thrombocytopenic. So basically, it suppresses cells that rapidly turn over in the bone marrow. Your mucosal membrane, including your gastroesophageal tract, also rapidly turns over, so this can lead to nausea and diarrhea and potential malabsorption problems. Now, the liver rapidly turns over too because it gets hit by toxins. And so if you don't help it replenish its cells, well, it will be very unhappy, and that's when their liver enzymes elevate. It needs folate to repair itself. Now, other agents that inhibit folate include 5-fluorouracil or 5-FU and capecitabine. These are used for colorectal and breast cancer. And these agents interfere with thymidylate synthase, an enzyme that requires folate to make DNA bases. People who take seizure drugs like phenytoin can deplete folate levels by affecting gut absorption and metabolism. It's important to methylate. Methylation aids in detoxifying heavy metals, chemicals, and estrogen. It's involved in the metabolism of drugs and alcohol. It is involved in glutathione production, which is a master antioxidant. This relies on folate and other methyl donors. Poor methylation leads to toxin buildup, chronic fatigue, and hormone imbalances. Catechol methyltransferase that uses methylation to break down estrogen and stress hormones like dopamine and epinephrine. So poor methylation can lead to a buildup of estrogen and increases the risk of breast cancer and fibroids, as well as other hormonal imbalances. Hence, a lack of folate increases your risk of hormonal cancers, PMSing, and adrenal dysfunction. Millions of people turn to caffeine for fatigue, or they go on a highly restrictive fat or standard American diet of processed foods. Well, if you don't have folate in your diet, methylation regulates fat metabolism and ATP production, which makes energy. And it does so by regulating carnitine synthesis and creatinine production for your muscle and your brain function. That won't turn out so well. So poor methylation contributes to chronic fatigue, muscle weakness, and metabolic disorders. In college, I suffered horribly from hay fever. I used to attend chemistry lab performing all my experiments one-handed. It wasn't because I was talented. It was because my other hand was busy holding up a tissue to my nose because I was draining like a faucet because of hay fever.
Hi friends, I am so thrilled that you want to take charge of your health and take charge of your food. Now, I know nutrition can be complex, but it doesn't have to be. And I'm here to support you in this lifelong journey. So if you point your camera app to this QR code, it'll take you to a link for a free handout that I created just for you. And if you like it, if you want to see other handouts, please go to the link in my show notes, and then you can leave me your feedback on what I could do to help you in your journey. Okay, back to the video now.
At that time, I lived in the dorm and ate dorm food for 3 years. I was severely folate deficient. I was not eating folate-rich foods, nor did I take a supplement with a multivitamin. I had horribly high histamine levels for several years, not realizing that I could have helped myself just by changing my diet and targeting folate-rich foods. The histamine N-methyltransferase enzyme uses N-adenosyl methionine, the universal methyl donor, to break down histamine. High histamine and poor methylation basically causes chronic allergies, asthma, and inflammation. It's also linked to mast cell activation syndrome and autoimmune conditions. The lack of folate will just make you grumpy and stressed, interfering with your brain function and mood regulation because there are several folate-dependent methylation that is critical for producing dopamine to help you focus, to get you motivated, to help you have pleasure, serotonin to regulate your mood, your sleep, and your appetite, norepinephrine and epinephrine for your stress response and energy. And in addition, methylation is required for producing phosphatidylcholine and sphingomyelin, which are key components of myelin sheaths that protect your nerve cells. So folate deficiencies impair this process, leading to neurological issues such as brain fog and neuropathy. Hence, methylation defects can cause depression, anxiety, ADHD, schizophrenia, cognitive decline, multiple sclerosis, neurodegenerative diseases, and nerve damage. And by the way, did you know that sunlight makes deficiency even worse? So without folate, you will have first dry skin or maybe healing issues and chronic ulcers, maybe even in your mouth and tongue. And if you're severely deficient in folate, we can then test your blood to see evidence. You will have large red blood cells and overall less red blood cells. This condition is called megaloblastic anemia, which is a very serious blood disorder caused by defective DNA synthesis leading to large, immature red blood cells called megaloblasts. These don't function properly. And by the way, vitamin B12 deficiency can also cause the exact same problem, oversized red blood cells, which have an impaired hemoglobin function, leading to poor oxygenation transport, which then causes fatigue, weakness, dizziness, and shortness of breath. And without folate, you get other toxins to build up like homocysteine, which we can also test in your blood. Elevated homocysteine levels damage blood vessels and increase the risk of heart disease, stroke, and blood clots. Doesn't sound good, does it? Folate simply donates a methyl group to homocysteine, and that converts it to methionine via methionine synthase. This requires actually vitamin B12. Methionine is used to produce S-adenosylmethionine, the universal methyl donor in the body. So if you're worried about dementia, then you should pay attention to folate levels, as a lack of folate causes memory problems, mood changes, depression, with or without dementia and cancer. So it's not just your brain, your peripheral nerves get damaged too, resulting in tingling, numbness, and difficulty walking. Your largest peripheral nerve is your vagus nerve. So it shouldn't be unexpected that you will have poor digestion, nausea, weight loss, and loss of appetite. The fastest growing cells are your immune cells. And that's why if you're folate deficient, your immune system will take a massive hit. It won't be able to scout out bad cells and take them out. You will be more susceptible to infections, slow healing, and cancer. And healing includes your muscles. Hence, if you have sore muscles, could you be low on folate? Folate is essential for amino acid metabolism of several important amino acids, such as methionine, cysteine, serine, glycine, and histidine. The synthesis of methionine from homocysteine is catalyzed by methionine synthase, an enzyme that requires not only folate as 5-methyl tetrahydrofolate and vitamin B12, but also vitamin B12. Hence, if you're missing either one, folate or vitamin B12, you will make less methionine and accumulate homocysteine, which increases your risk of chronic diseases, including cardiovascular disease and dementia. So when you have less blood flow from those cardiovascular diseases, you will also have impaired muscle healing. Folate, remember, helps produce S-adenosylmethionine, a key methyl donor. Methylation controls gene expression, neurotransmitter production, detoxification, and hormone metabolism. Proper methylation supports your mental health, your liver health, your cardiovascular health, and your immune health so that you can help prevent cancer. Folate is essential for the metabolism of homocysteine, an amino acid that I mentioned becomes toxic at high levels. And remember, you want it converted to methionine so that you can use that for protein synthesis and detoxification. We don't want to increase our clotting or our risk for heart disease, neurodegeneration, and inflammation. That's what you get with high homocysteine levels, besides having really bad anemia. Folate is necessary for the rapid cell division of precursor cells in the bone marrow. So without folate, your bone marrow cells suffer. They stay immature red blood cells. It's like a bunch of teenagers trying to regulate and man your FAA. Hence, this leads to anemia, especially because your hemoglobin is abnormal. Hemoglobin carries oxygen in your red blood cells and it relies on folate-driven DNA synthesis. Low folate can result in low hemoglobin levels, low red blood cells, which result in low oxygen, causing fatigue, weakness, and shortness of breath. Doesn't sound good, does it? Folic acid is more stable than folate in cooking and baking, and this ensures that you will still get some folic acid in your foods. But we've fortified grains to reduce neural tube defects in fetuses, which is great. We've also encouraged women of childbearing age to take prenatal vitamins, especially if they're planning to conceive. So one would think that this is enough to supplement, and the rest we should get in whole food. But why are we adding synthetic folic acid to food when there are plenty of foods, like hundreds if not thousands of foods with folate for both people who are pregnant and regular people to enjoy? You just need to eat enough of them. But the problem is the majority of people who are eating enriched flours, breads, pastas, rice, and breakfast cereals, well, they aren't pregnant, and they will never get pregnant, as half of the population is men. The US government subsidizes the grain industry, and maybe folic acid is just another reason to push grains and justify that the food is supplemented so it's a bit healthier with our taxpayer money, supplementing the processed food industry. Does this trillion-dollar food business really need our taxpayer money? We not only have to put money in it so that they can make all these processed foods, then we ask taxpayers, your money, to actually help patients who eat those processed foods. We plug it into the medical system through Medicare and Medi-Cal. In fact, we not only support the processed food industry by producing the food, we also help to clean up their mess. So we've solved the neural tube defect and traded it for diabetes, high blood pressure, mental health problems, obesity, and cancers. Does this sound ironic? We've already have hundreds and thousands of foods rich in food-grade folate. It seems like we're living in some backwards alternative DC universe. 90% of people, they don't eat enough fresh folate-rich produce. And there are no subsidies on these produce, which would lower the barrier for people to eat this stuff. Now, if you look at the CDC website, it literally states that there are no health risks identified from unmetabolized folic acid. But if you read further down the bottom, it also states that folic acid has been shown to increase the risk of developing colorectal adenomas or colon cancer. To me, that sounds like a health risk. I wonder why we're having an astronomical rate of colon cancer. It's also been associated with an increased risk of prostate cancer. Doesn't that make you wonder why our colon cancer rates are going up and why we were taught that prostate cancer is universal if you live in America? So we're spending billions of dollars on chemotherapy and millions of dollars for the food industry to fill our tummies with toxic chemicals in our processed foods. I'm not just talking about folic acid. I'm talking about the plethora of food coloring, artificial flavor, sugar substitutes, sugar itself, high fructose corn syrup, the oils and fats, and that's not including the toxic heavy metals with cadmium and arsenic and lead. And I think I forgot the forever plastics that are now found in human brain. Ironically, there are chemicals that aren't even hidden from the US public. 177 million people succumb to it every year, and over 2 billion people worldwide, they proudly consume this stuff. It's called alcohol. It's a $260 billion industry. And I find it strange that the economic burden of alcohol in the US is $249 billion, in which taxpayers support Medicare, of which $35.3 billion pays for all the complication of alcohol. So instead of banning alcohol, the FDA spends its time banning supplements. I think there's bigger fish to fry, don't you think? Clearly, we are not focusing on the right problems that take the lives of 178,000 people, not to mention the families and friends that people who drink affect. This is truly a dark, like DC comic multiverse. Alcohol damages anything that it touches, from your mouth, your esophagus, to your stomach. And when it gets in your intestine, it can damage your intestinal lining, reducing the absorption of folate from your food, even if you eat folate fresh food. This increases intestinal permeability, which allows folate to just pass right through your gut into your poop without being absorbed. In addition, alcohol increases folate loss through your urine and your bile, leading to rapid depletion. And in addition, alcohol interferes with folate transport protein, making it harder for cells to absorb folate. It reduces folate storage in the liver, the main site of folate metabolism. Alcohol blocks key folate-dependent enzymes involved in DNA synthesis and repair. This all increases your risk of cell mutations and cancer, especially in your liver, in your colon, and breast tissue. As little as 1 drink a day can increase your risk of breast cancer. And it doesn't matter if that's beer or hardcore liquor. There is more than 100 studies that have looked at the association between alcohol and breast cancer. And indeed, breast cancer rates increase when you drink alcohol. So if you're doing that in your youth, don't be surprised to get breast cancer a couple of decades later. Alcohol increases estrogen and other hormones that make cancer grow. It can increase folic acid, which can lead to an increased risk of cancer. And this is why you have to understand that synthetic folic acid is not the same as food-grade folate. Remember, alcohol damages the liver, which is responsible for converting synthetic folic acid into active methylfolate. You find synthetic folic acid in your bars, your breakfast cereals, your grains, and potentially your multivitamin. So when you slow down folic acid conversion, this elevates unmetabolized folic acid in your bloodstream. And you slow it down because alcohol inhibits dihydrofolate reductase, the enzyme that you need to make your folic acid active folate. Unfortunately, unmetabolized folic acid is not secreted as efficiently, so it lingers in your circulation. And unlike food-based folate, synthetic folic acid, it requires enzymatic conversion, which we just talked about. And buildup leads to immune system suppression because it impairs natural killer cell activity. It can potentially elevate your risk of cancer, promoting cancer cell growth. It also masks B12 deficiency, leading to potentially irreversible nerve damage and other neurological issues such as brain fog, anxiety, and cognitive decline. And by the way, there's a large portion of our population of people with methylation gene defects, which make them unable to use folic acid because their enzyme is just not very efficient. So these people, if they eat folic acid-enriched foods, they're going to have higher folic acid blood levels, which must be activated by the dihydrofolate, and people may have a deficiency in this enzyme. Dihydrofolate is then converted by a second enzyme into 5,10-methyl tetrahydrofolate. And this second enzyme is called methylene tetrahydrofolate synthase. And some people may be missing this enzyme too. So another enzyme, the methyl tetrahydrofolate reductase enzyme, is needed to convert 5,10-methyl tetrahydrofolate to 5-methyl tetrahydrofolate. Now, these are all pretty big words, but the main point is you can't just eat folic acid and expect it to work. The body needs several enzymes to get it from point A to the end bioactive compound called 5-methyl tetrahydrofolate. Now, when you eat whole foods rich in folate, they not only have folate, but they have a ton of other antioxidants and fiber. And the beauty of this folate is that it's already in the tetrahydrofolate form. So it can bypass the first enzyme, dihydral tetrahydrofolate. However, if you're missing the second enzyme, methyl tetrahydrofolate reductase, then you actually do need to take a methylated folate supplement, because ultimately you won't be able to make your methylated folate. So you're going to have to take it exogenously, because that methyl group is a universal methyl donor for all these other chemical reactions. And many of these systems actually support your DNA synthesis and your immune function. Obviously, getting enough folate is one way to reduce your risk of cancer through activation of your natural killer cells. And if you want to learn other ways on how to activate your natural killer cell system, watch the next video.